Right, so in this video I'm going to look at the AQA multiple choice section of paper 2 from 2016. So I'm just going to go through the multiple choice questions. So all exam boards have multiple choice questions in them. Some have more than others. So for example, Edexcel only have a few questions in section A. OCR have 15 questions for the AS. AQA have 20 questions, and Cambridge International have 30 questions, but that's micro and macro mixed together. So this is the macro for AS. So I'm going to go through the whole of the multiple choice section. So that gives you a good range of topics to look at. Right, so changes in real GDP are used to measure. So GDP, gross domestic product, that should be a fairly straightforward one. Changes in real GDP are used to measure economic growth. Inflation is measured using the CPI, and the level of employment is measured using the claimant count or the ILO survey, and the distribution of income, that's measured using the Gini coefficient, which you might not have done in year 12 yet. Right, so before you start tackling any diagram questions, especially one on aggregate demand, it's useful to remind yourself what aggregate demand is. So it's C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So this question is showing you two aggregate demand curves. You're shifting to the right, and what is most likely cause of a shift to the right of the aggregate demand curve. So aggregate demand is going to shift to the right if any of these things increase or if imports decrease. So it says an increase in, so you can see straight away that exports, X is for exports, so that's the correct answer. Other things being equal, the long run aggregate supply curve in the economy is likely to shift to the right if there is. Well, aggregate supply curve shifting to the right, we could do either one. We could do the classical, that looks like that. It shifts to the right if you've got an increase in the productive capacity. So an increase in productive capacity could be through better trained workers, it could be through better technology. Unfortunately, those are the two obvious things. Neither of those are an option here. If there's an increase in raw material prices, actually that's going to increase cost of production, so you're going to go the opposite way. An increase in tax, you're going to go to the left. An increase in wage rates, you're going to go to the left. So even if you don't know what factor mobility is, then you can already sort of cross off B, C and D, because B, C and D all represent an increase in cost of production, and an increase in cost of production shifts you to the left. So factor mobility, well, factor refers to your factors of production. So land, labour, capital and enterprise. Mobility is how easy is it to move those factors of production. So how easy is it to move labour from one job to another? How easy is it to move capital from one job to another? So if you're picking apples and then you decide you're going to produce more pears, is it easy to get the machines to pick pears instead of apples? So the long run aggregate supply is going to shift to the right if there's an increase in factor mobility, because what that means is your workers can move to the jobs. Either they can move skills or they can move locations easily, so skills gaps can be filled quickly. Number 4, a country has a slow rate of growth of productivity and rising cyclical unemployment. So rising cyclical unemployment, that's suggesting you're in a recession, because cyclical unemployment is unemployment when you are in a recession. It's unemployment due to the economic cycle. So if you think about your economic cycle, there's your recession. So we've got rising cyclical unemployment suggesting that we're in a recession, and we've got a slow rate of growth of productivity. All of the things being equal, which measures are most likely to increase the rate of growth of productivity and reduce cyclical unemployment? So there's quite a lot of things going on here. So in order to increase productivity, then you probably need more investment, perhaps in new technology. You need to train your workers better. None of those is an option. Oh, more government spending on training, that is an option. If we have lower tax on firms, that means firms have more money which they can then spend on training the workers or investing in new technology. These other parts of these questions. So we want to reduce unemployment. So to reduce unemployment, we need to be thinking about, oops, we don't want that supply curve. To reduce unemployment, we want to be thinking about shifting our aggregate demand to the right, because that increases economic growth. And if you're shifting your aggregate demand to the right, then you've got more output and you need more workers to produce that output. So shifting aggregate demand to the right can be done through lower interest rates, because lower interest rates mean there's going to be less saving, more consumption. There's also going to be more investment, which can then increase the productivity as well. So D will be your correct answer. Right, number 5, we've got two aggregate demand curves and the short run aggregate supply curve. So we're shifting to the right. Just remind you of the formula. So we're shifting to the right again, which is most likely to cause a movement of the economy from Y1 to Y2. So we're going from Y1 to Y2. So again, we've got to think about which of the things in this formula are changed by these factors down here. So we want to shift to the right. Well, an increase in saving is going to mean if there's more saving, there's less consumption. So it can't be that one. A decrease in the money supply, well, that's a bit irrelevant for when it comes to demand, because there's nothing in that formula, but I suppose you could say a decrease in the money supply means less consumption. An increase in productivity, well, there's nothing there related to that formula. The final one, a decrease in imports. Well, for aggregate demand to increase, all of these things need to increase, but because imports are subtracted, then imports decrease. So that's your correct answer. Number 6, now this is one that could be quite confusing if you don't understand what's going on. So what we've got here is index numbers. So with index numbers, what they've done in this situation is they've said that the base year is 2013, and you make 2013 100. Now obviously GDP isn't 100 and the population isn't 100. The population will be billions or millions, depending on your country, but they've said that whatever the number is in 2013, we're going to call that 100. And if the number goes down the following year, it's going to be less than 100, and you work it out percentage-wise. If it goes up, it's going to be more than 100. So what we'll do is we'll go through the answers to sort of explain what's going on with them. So the population was higher than GDP in 2011. Well, that's just a load of rubbish, because the GDP is going to be in billions of pounds and population is numbers of people. So it can't possibly be that. Part B, between 2011 and 2013, GDP grew by 8%. Now this is the one that a lot of people will say is the correct answer. So 2011 to 2013, people think it's grown by 8%. Well, yes, it is going up by 8, but 92 to 100 is not 8%. Right? The change is 8 over your original of 92 times by 100. That does not give you 8%. If you go from 100 to 108, that would be 8%. But when you go backwards, that's not 8%. So it can't be that one. But a lot of people will think that's correct because it kind of looks like it's the right answer. C, there was no growth in GDP per capita between 2013 and 2015. So per capita means per person. Now these numbers are just GDP. So what's happened from 2013 to 2015, GDP has gone up by 3%, but your population's also gone up by 3%. So you'd expect GDP to go up if population has gone up. So because they've both gone up by the same amount, then that means there's no growth at all, because your GDP has gone up, but you've got to share it now between more people. So that is the correct answer. Right, number 7. So this is one where you've got a lot of things going on. Right, so as a consequence of a severe global recession, an economy has experienced a demand side shock and is now growing below its trend rate. So let's just look at what that means. So here is your, I'll do this in another colour actually. Here is your trend. That's the trend growth. And on the bottom axis, we've got time and we've got GDP on the y-axis. If we're growing below the trend, that means that we are on this yellow bit here. We're below the trend. So below the trend is the yellow bit. It says it's now growing below the trend line. So all of the things being equal, which of the following combinations is now most likely to exist in the economy? So the rate of unemployment is falling. Well, no, when you're below the trend line, the economy is in a bad situation. So your rate of unemployment is likely to be rising. So we get rid of those. So we have to think, well, what is going to be happening to inflation? Well, if you've got falling unemployment, if you've got increasing unemployment or falling employment, then what you're probably going to find is you've got less aggregate demand or low aggregate demand, and you've probably got falling inflation. So C would be your correct answer. Right, number 8. Which of the following could the UK be said to be experiencing with a negative output gap? So remind you of the diagram. Your negative output gap, that's your negative output gap. So if we look at the answers, output per worker is lower in the UK than the USA. Well, not necessarily, because the USA could also have a negative output gap. They could both have a negative output gap. Real GDP in the UK is less than the economy's productive potential. Okay, so the trend line is the productive potential as well. So that is going to be your correct answer. Number 9, structural unemployment. So structural unemployment, you need to think about coal mines closing. So many years ago when Maggie Thatcher closed the coal mines, there was very high structural unemployment, and that's why you had all the miners' strikes, because workers in coal mines didn't have any other skills. So there was very, very high unemployment in those areas. So the correct answer for that is going to be long-term changes in the pattern of demand for the products of particular industries. So therefore those industries are likely to close down, and you're going to, or the demand is going to reduce significantly, and you're going to get a massive reduction. Right, so question 10, you've got an economy is in a macroeconomic equilibrium, producing at its normal capacity. So it's saying we've not got any long run economic growth, so we could have our long run average supply curve, and we've not got long run economic growth, so it means that we're not going to shift that. If we have an increase in aggregate demand from AD1 to AD2, what is going to happen? Well, you can see from there that we're going to get an increase here. This is our price level, so we're going to get an increase in prices. If you'd had an increase in aggregate supply as well, then that would be a different outcome. But they specifically said without long run economic growth, so you're not shifting the supply curve. Right, we've got a lot of things going on with this question. So we're in the recovery phase of the economic cycle. So if you think about your economic cycle, we're in the recovery phase. So we're in this bit here, that's your recovery phase. So in the recovery phase, then we've got, the easy part is we've got economic growth, we've got an increase in GDP. So it's one of those, so it's definitely not A. Next, easy, is unemployment. If you've got economic growth, the economy is growing, you need more people to produce the extra output, then you're going to get a decrease in unemployment. So that's going to be one of these. So we're now down to B or C. So we've got to the point where we've sort of got a 50-50 chance of getting it right. If the economy is growing, then you're likely to get an increase in investment. That doesn't really help us in this particular question, but at least we can confirm that it's still either B or C. So then we have to think, well, what's likely to be happening to inflation? Well, if you've got economic growth, you've got your aggregate demand curve shifting to the right, then you're most likely going to get a little increase in inflation. In the recovery phase, it probably won't be big, but you will likely get some inflation. So C is going to be your correct answer. Number 12, the table below shows different sets of changes taking place in the economy. All other things being equal, which one of the following combinations is most likely to have the effect of shifting short run aggregate supply curve to the left. So shifting your aggregate supply curve to the left is going like that. And that usually happens when costs of production increase. And it also, so taxes increasing, so we've got taxes here. Taxes increasing is equivalent to increasing costs of production. So we've got rising and rising. And then we have to think what's happening to the exchange rate. Well, the reason the exchange rate is relevant is because firms may well be importing raw materials. So if firms are importing raw materials and the price of those imports goes up, then that is going to increase their cost of production. So we need to think, well, what needs to be happening to the exchange rate to cause imports to become more expensive? And that's going to be a fall in the exchange rate is going to make imports more expensive. So A is your correct answer, number 12. Right, balance of payments is always quite difficult. So the current account of the balance of payments is in surplus. Now your current account is made up of goods and services and also incomes. So it depends upon which specification you're using as to how they talk about the balance of payments. But when we've got incomes, it talks about primary income and secondary income. It doesn't really matter for this question which is which. So what we've got deficit in goods and we've also got deficit in services. Normally, or certainly for the UK, you get a deficit in goods and a surplus in services. But if you've got a deficit in both goods and services, then if you've got surplus overall, you've got a goods part of the balance of the current account, you've got a services part of the current account, and you've also got income. So if these two are both negative, but overall you've got positive, then your income has to be positive. So the combined primary and secondary income flows must be positive. So the two of those together have to be positive. It can't be this one, because if your primary income flow is positive but your secondary income flow is negative, then that's not going to work. So C is going to be your correct answer. At number 14, contractionary fiscal policy. Well, contractionary fiscal policy is fiscal policy which shifts your aggregate demand to the left. So it's something that causes one of these things to fall or imports to rise. So one of these main points need to fall or imports needs to increase to shift aggregate demand to the left. So if we have a look at our options, decreasing the supply of credits, that probably wouldn't make a huge amount of difference. Increasing spending on welfare benefits, well, that's going to shift aggregate demand to the right. Reducing progressive taxation, so that means people have more money to spend. And part D is the correct one, increasing the size of the budget surplus. So if you're increasing the size of the budget surplus, what that means is the government is likely to be increasing their taxes and reducing their spending, because what they're wanting to do is they're wanting to have a budget surplus so that perhaps they can pay off their debts. So increasing the budget surplus is the correct answer. At number 15, all of the things being equal, an increase in the exchange rate for the pound. So an increase in the value of the pound means that the value of the pound goes from 1.5 to maybe $2. Okay, so that's what it means by an increase in the value of the pound, or it's called an appreciation. So this has happened due to a rise in interest rates. This is a key part of this question. It's due to the rise in interest rates. So it's most likely to cause what to the UK? So let's take a look at these. So surplus on the current account of the balance of payments. Well, surplus on the current account of the balance of payments means that imports are going to be falling and exports are going to be rising. This is actually going to cause the opposite to happen, because what this means, if we have this increase, it means that UK goods are cheaper, foreign goods are cheaper for us to buy, so we're going to buy more foreign goods, so it's actually going to do the opposite. It's going to increase the price of imported goods. Well, no, it's not. It's going to decrease the price of imported goods. It's going to make American goods cheaper to us. It's going to increase the level of unemployment. Well, quite possibly because we're buying foreign goods instead of UK goods, because the foreign goods are now cheaper. So that will be the correct answer. Right, budget deficit. Now don't mix that up with a current account deficit. A budget deficit is when you've got government spending is greater than taxation. So the government is sort of in, I suppose you could say, is in debt. So imports and exports is definitely wrong because that's to do with balance of payments. Government spending exceeds tax revenue, so that is the correct answer. Anything to do with exports and imports is most definitely wrong. Right, number 17. The table below shows the annual percentage change in real GDP for an economy between 2013 and 2016. The long-run trend rate of growth of this economy is estimated to be 2.8%. So let's just go back to our economic cycle again. And we'll put our trend rate of growth on here. And that is expected to grow, that's expected to be 2.3%. Sorry, 2.8%. So on these axes here, we've got real GDP, not the growth. So each year it's growing by 2.8%. So that's not a straight line. It's not a straight horizontal line because on the axis it's real GDP, it's not percentage change. So we're expecting it to be 2.8%. Which of the following statements is correct? In 2013, the economy's negative output gap increased. Well, in 2013, we have got 2.4 and the trend is supposed to be 2.8. So we're below, which means we've got the negative output gap. So A is the correct answer. Number 18, which of the following statements relating to the use of supply side policies is correct? So supply side policies is shifting your aggregate supply or long run aggregate supply to the right. Often investment in new technology, it could be government spending, improving efficiency, it could be government spending on education, it could be firms spending on education to educate your workers better. So if we have a look at the options, we've got supply side improvements in the economy can only be brought about by government policy. No, because it could be firms spending money, it doesn't have to be government. So supply side policies are intended to increase long run trend rate of economic growth. Yes, that is correct. The whole point is that you shift your long run aggregate supply curve to the right. Number 19. So this is just a learning question. So circular flow of income. Income is equal to output, which is equal to expenditure. That's just a definition. Income is equal to output. Injections are a different thing. Injections are money going into the circular flow. So they've just put all sorts of different combinations of anything that you might have seen on your circular flow diagram. But the key thing is that income is equal to output and is also equal to expenditure. And the final question, we've got the diagram below shows two aggregate demand and two aggregate supply curves. So these ones are a bit confusing because you've got so many curves. So we're starting at E1 and we're finishing at E2. All other things being equal, which of the following combinations of macroeconomic policies is likely to have moved the economy to its new equilibrium point, E2? So we've got an increase in demand and we've got an increase in supply. So again, we think about our aggregate demand curve. And increase in aggregate demand, if we look down the left-hand side of the answers, increase in interest rates. Well, if you increase interest rates, you're actually going to reduce consumption, so you're going to get a reduction in aggregate demand. Reduction in interest rates, yeah, that could be right. We've already said that's wrong, and that one could be right. If we look at our fiscal policies, increase in value-added tax. Well, if you increase tax, we've got to remember as well, we're shifting aggregate supply to the right as well. If we increase tax, then that's going to actually mean firms have got less money and therefore less investment. If we're shifting our LRAs to the right, it's likely because firms are investing more. A reduction in direct taxes. A reduction in direct taxes. Direct taxes are taxes on income, not just on income of consumers, but income of firms. If you reduce taxes on firms, they then have to pay less in tax and they therefore have more profit. If they've got more profit, they're going to spend more on investment, and if they spend on investment, it shifts aggregate supply to the right. So B is the correct answer.